All right, let's just jump right in. Tucked away near the very end of the New Testament is this tiny little letter, the book of Jude. And it's one of the shortest, most jam-packed, and honestly, one of the weirdest books in the whole Bible. It's only 25 verses long, but it tosses out these stories and references that seem to come from completely out of left field, leaving most of us today just scratching our heads. So today, we're going to peel back the layers on this strange little book and figure out what in the world the author was talking about.
And this, right here, is the central puzzle we need to solve. Jude just assumes his audience is totally up to speed on these events and characters that, well, they aren't in the Old Testament. He doesn't stop to explain them, he just uses them like everybody should know. So the big question is, where did he get this stuff? And why did he think it was the perfect way to make his point?
I mean, look at this. Jude straight up quotes a prophecy from Enoch. Now, Enoch is a real figure from Genesis, but here's the kicker. That prophecy, it's not in Genesis. You won't find it anywhere in the Old Testament. Jude is quoting from a completely different book, one that his readers clearly knew and took seriously.
So, to really get what Jude is doing, we have to step outside the bounds of our modern Bible for a minute. We need to explore the wider literary world that he and his audience were living in. And trust me, this is where all the pieces of the puzzle start to click into place.
You see, Jude was writing during what's called the Second Temple period, and this was a time of incredible creativity for Jewish thought. There was a huge amount of literature being written, telling these amazing stories that expanded on what was in their scriptures. And these weren't some secret hidden documents. They were popular, they were well-known, and they really shaped how people understood God, angels, and the origins of evil.
And the superstar of all this literature was, without a doubt, the Book of 1 Enoch. It basically retells and expands on that short, mysterious story from Genesis 6 about the sons of God and the daughters of men. But in Enoch's version, these angels who are called the Watchers do more than just sin physically. Their biggest crime, their ultimate sin, is giving humanity forbidden knowledge. It's false teaching that leads to our own destruction. And that connection, that link between cosmic evil and false teaching is absolutely vital for understanding Jude.
And check this out. Jude wasn't the only one thinking this way. The parallels between his letter and the book of 2 Peter are just uncanny. Now, it's not necessarily that one copied the other. It's more like both authors were swimming in the same theological water. They were both pulling from this shared pool of ideas that started in Genesis 6 and were fully fleshed out in books like 1 Enoch, to fight back against the false teachers who were causing trouble in their community.
Okay, so with all that background in our heads, let's go back and look at a few of Jude's specific, really weird references and see how they suddenly start to make a whole lot more sense.
All right, here is a perfect example. Jude says that the people of Sodom went after strange flesh. Now, what on earth does that mean? The original story in Genesis is horrifying enough on its own, but Jude seems to be hinting that something even bigger, something more cosmic was going on.
Okay, so let's break this down. The men of Sodom themselves, they knew they were guilty of truly terrible things. Violent assault, a complete violation of hospitality, which was a sacred duty back then. But Jude's readers, because they were soaked in these stories about the Watchers from Genesis 6, they would have heard a deeper layer to it. For them, strange flesh meant angelic flesh. The sin wasn't just human-on-human evil, it was a cosmic rebellion, an attempt to shatter the boundary between the human world and the heavenly one.
And then you get this totally bizarre reference to the archangel Michael arguing with the devil over the body of Moses. Again, go look for that story in the Old Testament. It's not there. This comes from another popular book from that time, probably one called The Testament of Moses. Jude just drops it into the conversation, totally confident that his audience will get the reference and understand his point about who really has authority.
So let's just lock in this definition because it's so important. When Jude talks about the angels who abandoned their post, he's talking about the Watchers. And remember, in the books he and his audience knew, their ultimate crime wasn't just lust. It was the act of false teaching, of giving humanity the secrets to its own ruin. That's why they are the absolute perfect comparison for the false teachers Jude is trying to warn everyone about.
Okay, so Jude is using all these well-known supernatural stories about heroes and villains to make a powerful point about false teachers. But he's making an even bigger theological move, one that puts Jesus himself right at the center of everything.
Now, this is where things get really wild. Take a look at this reading of Jude, verse 5. Many of our oldest and most reliable manuscripts of the New Testament say that it was Jesus who saved the people of Israel out of Egypt. Not God the Father, not some angel, Jesus. This is a radical, powerful claim that puts Jesus right at the heart of Israel's most important story. And before you think this is just some fringe translation or a biased interpretation, it's not. This reading is actually accepted by a broad consensus of critical scholars, the very people who put together the academic versions of the Greek New Testament that everyone uses, regardless of their faith. Basically, according to the rules of textual analysis, this is considered the most likely original reading, partly because it's so shocking. A later scribe would be much more likely to change it to something less controversial than to make it up.
So what's the big picture here? All through the New Testament, you see writers arguing that Jesus is superior to the greatest heroes of the Old Testament. He's greater than Abraham. He's greater than Moses. He's greater than David. Well, in the same way, Jude and Peter are arguing that Jesus is also greater than Enoch, who is this legendary hero of their time. Jesus is the ultimate hero, the true victor over evil.
You know, understanding Jude's world does so much more than just explain a few strange verses. It actually changes how we think about the Bible itself and the world that it came from.
This quote from Dr. Michael Heiser just hits the nail on the head. The Bible was never meant to be a complete encyclopedia of every single thing that ever happened or every theological idea people had. The biblical authors were selective. They chose the material that was right for the story they were inspired to tell. Just because something isn't in the Bible doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means it wasn't part of that particular inspired story.
Here's probably the easiest way to wrap your head around it. For Jude's original audience, stories about Enoch and the Watchers were just in the air. They were part of the culture. You didn't need to own a copy of 1 Enoch to know these stories, any more than someone today needs to own a Bible to have heard of Adam and Eve or Noah's Ark. It's just common knowledge that you pick up from the world around you.
And that just leaves us with this fascinating final thought. When we read a text like the Bible, we're really only seeing one part of a much bigger, ongoing conversation. The book of Jude is this amazing little reminder that to really understand the message, sometimes we have to listen for the echoes of all the other stories that were being told just off the page. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other stories and ideas shaped their world? And how does knowing that change the way we read these texts today?